Listen. Do you hear? It's coming back, turning the screen into a buzzing, crawling, creeping nightmare of terror.
What's up, everyone? Today we're wrapping up our series on the Fly movies with the double feature. I've already covered the 1980s Fly films and the 1958 classic that started it all. Now, all that's left are the sequels to the original film, The Return of the Fly and The Curse of the Fly. Both of these movies definitely carve out their own unique identities. Return of the Fly is essentially a crime thriller mashed together with 50s sci-fi. And then there's The Curse of the Fly. This is a weird one. It's a dark, campy B-horror that's filled with living, hybrid hell monsters. But don't take my word for it.
Experiments of accursed scientists turn human beings into living, hybrid hell monsters.
We'll get to all that soon enough. For now, fire up the disintegrator integrator and let's dive into the madness.
This is the son of the original Fly, daring to explore the forbidden science of transmigration that brought horrible death to his father.
The Return of the Fly was released in 1959, just 1 year after the original. It was written and directed by Edward Burns. Off the bat, you'll notice the sequel was shot in black and white, and that's the case for both movies I'll be discussing. The sequels had lower budgets, which ruled out shooting in color. The story opens in a bleak place. It's 15 years later, and Helene Delam has passed away. Philippe, now played by Brett Halsey, is a young man, and as promised, he's followed in the footsteps of his father and become a brilliant scientist. One huge plus for this movie is the star power of the returning Vincent Price.
You must see it with your own eyes to believe it.
After reading the first draft of the script, Price was said to be thrilled to come back, and even felt the sequel was one of the rare cases where the follow-up proved to be better than the original. Unfortunately, as the script went through rewrites, changes were made he wasn't exactly happy about. In any case, Vincent Price was excellent as always and gave a strong performance. In the previous film, we saw Francois looking over young Philippe, so it's great to see that fatherly relationship carried over here. Early on, Philippe pressures his uncle to reveal the details of his father's demise. Francois reluctantly brings Philippe to his brother's abandoned lab, where he tells him all about Andre's tragic accident.
It destroyed him. It could destroy you.
He was careless. I won't be.
So, we as viewers already know that by continuing his father's work, Philippe is doomed. I mean, somebody here needs to turn into a fly, otherwise we don't have a movie. But following Philippe in his endeavor gives the film momentum and gets you on his side. With the help of his friend Alan Hines, as played by David Frankham, Philippe establishes his own lab, and they get to work. Let's just say they get off to a slow start. One of the stronger elements of the sequel is the dynamics between Philippe and Francois. In one of the more memorable scenes, Philippe forces his uncle to help him by threatening to sell his half of the family business, so he can continue his research.
You're holding a gun to my head.
I'm sorry, Francois. But if you won't help me, I'll raise the money any way I can.
Francois begrudgingly ends up funding and working with Philippe, which is perfect if you're a fan of Vincent Price. It gets him more directly involved in the story.
So fantastic, words can't begin to describe it.
Before you know it, Philippe, Francois, and Alan are zapping animals back and forth. And as you know, animal transportations in the Fly movies tend to be disasters.
Giantism.
Must be in the amplitude control.
Keep in mind, the purpose of the matter transporter isn't to turn gerbils enormous. As for the fate of this little guy, well, he's disintegrated and left in stasis to be brought back later. But that's something that eventually turns out terrible. We'll get to that shortly.
Hello, Cecile.
Hello, Philippe.
There's also a hint of a love story here. Philippe has a relationship with the housekeeper's daughter Cecile, as played by Danielle Demetz. But their relationship takes a backseat, and she really isn't given much to do. That's unusual. In most of the Fly films, the love interest is such an important aspect.
I've come here to say one magic word to you. Cheeseburger.
Unfortunately, in this film, it feels like Cecile is mostly just here so there's a beautiful woman to scream in the trailers.
Cheeseburger.
One aspect this film does get right is showing Philippe's struggle with the tragedies in his life. There are haunting indications of his trauma, such as moments when he notices a fly buzzing around.
Got him.
Philippe's reactions beg the question, how much does he recall from when he was a child? As Philippe toils away with his experiment, a wrench is thrown into the mix.
Hello, Ronnie.
Not Ronnie. Alan Hines, if you please.
It turns out his partner and supposed friend, Alan Hines, is actually Ronald Holmes, a criminal scam artist whose true intentions are to steal Philippe's work and sell off the plans to the highest bidder.
Move this man!
And that's where this slimeball Undertaker comes into play. He has connections and can move stolen property.
You get in touch with the leading electronics outfits, the big international cartels. Ask them just one thing. If they're interested in a disintegrator.
David Frankham played a great villain. He wins you over early on, then pulls the rug out from under you and goes full-on bad guy.
Ronald Holmes, you're under arrest.
Later, a policeman who's been in search of Alan shows up at the lab to arrest him. However, Alan tricks the policeman, shoves him into the teleportation machine, and hits the switch. Now, remember that lab rat I mentioned earlier that was left in stasis? Well, the animal ends up fused with this guy. This movie is just full of creepy surprises. And if you thought that was disturbing, Alan also kills the other half of his brand new creation. This thing. And when he steps in this creature, it's guaranteed to make most anyone look away from the screen. As I mentioned earlier, Return of the Fly is basically a crime thriller mashed with 50s sci-fi, and of course there's horror in here as well. But these aren't exactly genres you see mixed together too often, yet it works surprisingly well. I have to credit the film for shifting into this almost neo-noir territory pretty smoothly. By the time Alan returns from disposing of the half-man, half-rat, Philippe is finally onto him.
Let's hear you explain these.
With that, a fight breaks out, but Alan gets the better of Philippe and tosses him into the transporter as well. This machine is getting a ton of action in this film. To cement the fact that he's total and complete garbage, Alan spitefully drops a fly into the chamber with Philippe. So, if you were wondering how another guy would be turned into a fly, here you go. Surprisingly, Alan still wasn't done being awful.
Where is he?
Shall we say he's serving the cause of science?
Thankfully, Francois is a certified badass and survives being shot. But even his badassery can't save Philippe. When he reintegrates his nephew, Philippe has also become a half-man, half-fly, just like his father. This dramatic reveal was executed really well. It's not as memorable as the iconic introduction of the Fly from the original film, but it still had impact. Up to this point, Philippe was established as someone to root for, so when he's mutated under these circumstances, it feels all the more tragic. Philippe soon makes his escape, and there's a police pursuit. From here on out, we basically get a revenge story as Philippe stalks Alan and his friend. Unfortunately, this is also where The Return of the Fly took a bit of a downturn for me. The lower budget left the sequel lacking when it came to creature effects. I like the fresh take on the mutated fly hybrid. The details and sculpting look awesome, but I think the actual size was a bit too large. In a few shots, we even see the 7-foot stuntman adjusting the top-heavy mask. Considering the lower budget and time constraints, maybe the less is more approach would have been better. We also see the smaller fly half of Philippe, which features his swapped head, but for some reason it still has all of the correct fly appendages. Anyway, none of this was really a deal breaker. Philippe does eventually get his revenge. He kills the slimy Undertaker and snaps Alan's neck. He even stuffs him into a coffin for good measure. This is a funeral home, so that was pretty convenient.
I'm all right.
Anyway, Philippe soon returns home, and the film wraps up very quickly. Mini Philippe is found, put into the chamber, and Francois restores his nephew back to human form. On the surface, it seems all is well, but I still found this conclusion to be somewhat bittersweet. The original Fly explored the danger of overreach through scientific endeavors for those who are careless. However, in the sequel, we didn't see Philippe grow overly ambitious or become impatient and reckless like his father. Philippe was just dealt a bad hand because his partner turned out to be a criminal, suggesting it may not even matter how careful you are, sometimes even those closest can cause your downfall. For me, the best part of the sequel was the first half. The unfolding mystery and the character development was all handled pretty well. The Return of the Fly is a solid sequel overall, but can the same be said for The Curse of the Fly?
You're not even human. You murdered those men, and you made me a murderer, too. The terror, the torment, the torture, the curse of the Fly.
I have to admit, on my first watch of this movie, half of my brain kept screaming,
But that's impossible.
but then the other half screamed back, shut up, let's see where this madness goes. The Curse of the Fly was released in 1965. It was written by Harry Spalding and directed by Don Sharp, who was best known for his work on the Hammer films. This film feels oddly disconnected. For one thing, there's no fly. Sure, there's one on the poster, and we see a photograph of the fly later in the film, which is confusing because this picture was never taken. But there's no fly to be found, and there's no Vincent Price either.
Oh, to hell with it.
So everything here almost feels like it's taking place in a bizarre alternate universe. Perhaps it's appropriate the film opens with a memorable shot of breaking glass, shattering our expectations from the get-go. We kickstart things here with a mysterious new character, Patricia Stanley, as portrayed by Carol Gray. She escapes from an asylum and runs around in her underwear as the credits roll by. Pretty much everything from here on out is very out there. Soon enough, we meet Martin DeLame, as played by George Baker.
When we get to a phone, you'd better call your family.
I don't have any family.
He picks her up and helps her get back on her feet, but we get into more of a fantasy territory thanks to a rushed romance that leads to Martin and Patricia quickly getting married.
But you don't know anything about me.
You don't know anything about me either.
The love story here may be shaky, but I actually really enjoyed the fact that both Martin and Patricia openly hide their past. This creates tension going forward, because we assume it's only a matter of time until everything comes out, at which point anything goes. And as it turns out, Martin DeLame has a ton of secrets himself. First off, we learn he suffers from recessive fly genes that cause him to age rapidly. He needs a serum to help keep himself young. But the largest secret is his family is still hammering away at their teleportation experiments, and things still aren't going well. The extended DeLame family are unique. Aside from Martin, who we know is quick to marry the first woman he finds running along the side of the road in fluffy panties, there's also his brother, Albert DeLame, as played by Michael Graham.
I won't have anything more to do with the experiment.
Albert is the voice of reason in this movie. He wants out of the family business ASAP, and I don't blame him. Although the family has managed to teleport people between Quebec and London, the results have been far from perfect.
Why can't I make you understand? Look at your body.
Those radiation burns may look bad, but we're actually going to see a lot worse as this story progresses. Lastly, there's Martin and Albert's father, Henry DeLame, as portrayed by Brian Donlevy. Henry's completely obsessed with perfecting the matter transporter no matter what the cost.
The teleporter will replace every known means of transportation.
I know all about the Dream Father. It's all I've ever heard. But it doesn't work.
So, who is Henry DeLame? Well, brace yourselves because I'm about to drag you all right down a rabbit hole with me on this one. We're told 3 generations of DeLames have struggled with their research in matter transportation. The first generation will be Andre. The second generation will be his son Philippe. But things get muddy around the third generation. We know Henry is Martin and Albert's father, but the question is Henry Philippe's son? That can't be, because that would make this a story that follows 4 generations. Things get even more wishy-washy thanks to the return of Inspector Charis, who we haven't seen since the original film. Charis, who was originally played by Herbert Marshall, looked to be around 65 or so in the first Fly. So by the time we see Charis again, now played by Charles Carlson, he has to be around 100 years old.
But that's impossible.
That doesn't really help sort things out at all. Anyway, happy 100th birthday to Inspector Charis. You don't look a day over 99, sir. One last way to clear things up is to refer back to the original short story by George Langeland. In that story, Andre and Helene's child wasn't named Philippe, he was actually named Henry. So in short, Henry is Philippe. Probably. Who's also suffering from advanced aging, but for whatever reason, his character has been renamed. Or maybe he's just a whole new character and I'm just overthinking the whole thing.
Cheeseburger.
For those of you actually still watching, let's continue. Martin returns to the family estate with his new bride, and we meet two assistants to the Delam family, Bert Kwok and Yvette Rees, who portray Ty and Juan. Yes, that's really their names, and yes, one of them clearly is an Asian. As is the case with most everyone in this film, they too seem to have secrets. From here on out, The Curse of the Fly maintains a balance of mystery, intrigue, and we even get some genuine moments of horror. We never exactly get all the answers we want in this film, but if you allow the story to play out, we do eventually get some explanations. For instance, we learn Patricia was actually a concert pianist who suffered a nervous breakdown due to the sudden death of her mother, so that's why she was institutionalized. And that plot ties us to the head mistress of the asylum, who goes to the police after Patricia escaped. Eventually, Patricia is tracked to the Delam estate.
She appears to have made a remarkable recovery since leaving your hands.
It's encouraging to see the Delams don't turn Patricia over, instead they back her up. But, are they protecting her or looking out for their own interests? That brings us to the true turning point in this film, when Patricia discovers an old stable on a residence, and what she finds inside is truly horrific. After Patricia finds these monstrosities locked away, things begin to fall into place. Clearly, the Delam family has gone off the rails. They've pushed their work to a very dark place, experimenting on people.
We're scientists. We have to do things we hate that even sicken us.
And that includes Martin's first wife. Yep, as it turns out, the mysterious woman who freaks out Patricia is Martin's first wife, Judith. She was experimented on as well. And this revelation actually gives the earlier scene a sense of eerie foreshadowing. Perhaps this is what's ahead in Patricia's future. On a related note, one of the more interesting subplots in The Curse of the Fly was Patricia's mental health. She flees from the asylum in the opening, and at the Delam estate she's exposed to all kinds of bizarre sights. She's told these things are just dreams, which only makes her question her sanity. Another person behind Patricia's torment is Juan, who's sympathetic to Judith's cruel fate. In turn, she terrorizes Martin's new wife, and as you watch these nightmares unfold, you really just want to see Patricia get the hell out of this house of horrors ASAP. Anyway, back to our 100-year-old friend, retired Inspector Charis. He tells the new guy in the block, Inspector Ronnie, as played by Jeremy Wilkins, all about the Delam family and their warped experiments.
That was the beginning of the curse of the Delambres, the curse of the fly, you may say.
With that, the police begin to close in on the Delams. The family decides there's way too much heat on them and it's time to flee. But before doing so, Henry demands all evidence of the living hybrid hell monsters must be eliminated. And this is where it becomes even more clear just how far this family has fallen. By this point, I was just hoping for an all-out creature revolt. And we do get a solid battle that features one escaped test subject versus Martin Delam. It's a knockdown, drag-out brawl. And to be honest, I was rooting for the creature. However, Henry ultimately comes to the aid of his son, so the horror continues. The defeated test subjects are soon transported, but in yet another grim turn, they're merged into a hideous blob. Poor Albert is forced to take care of that mess. And in the middle of this chaos is Patricia. Patricia basically spends the final portion of this film in and out of consciousness, which is a disservice to her character. Martin continues to drug her as he scrambles to tie up loose ends. Patricia does eventually get back in on the action. After she awakens, she's confronted by Martin's ex-wife Judith, who was set free by Juan. We then get a classic horror chase sequence. Thanks to Ty, Patricia escapes, but Ty is forced to kill Judith.
Every great scientific advance is made at the cost of human lives. Success justifies small defeats.
Henry, who is firmly in mad scientist territory, convinces Martin to send Patricia to London so they can all escape the police. Henry volunteers to be transported first, but when Martin sends him to London, we get a shocking twist.
Reintegrate now.
Albert has already destroyed the machine once and for all. So, enjoy being lost in oblivion, Henry. Or Philippe, whoever you are. Eventually, Inspector Ronnie arrives at the estate. Patricia awakens, trapped in a teleportation chamber, and escapes.
Oh, no!
Martin goes after her, and even tries to drag her away with him. But he starts aging again. By this point, he has no serum, and he's fading fast.
Oh, no!
And by the time Inspector Ronnie finds what's left of him, he's just a melted skeleton. And that's about it. Or is it?
The next victim could be you. Or you. Or you.
Nah, that's it. Despite some issues, I really did enjoy The Curse of the Fly. It's certainly the more fun entry between the two movies. It's no wonder some consider this final entry in a trilogy to be a hidden gem. There's a lot to like here. This story took chances, it was unpredictable, and it even went as far as to turn the Delams into villains, particularly Henry. I also enjoyed the creature work and effects. The Curse of the Fly offers up much more variety than the second film in that area. Overall, I thought this one made great use of its budget, and there were some truly haunting visuals and a creepy atmosphere. Lastly, I wanted to note, the same iconic score by Paul Sawtelle and Burt Sheffer is featured in both films. It's one of the all-time great horror sci-fi scores, so hearing it again is always welcome. In closing, I'd say, if you're a fan of the original Fly and enjoy some B-horror and sci-fi, then I think you're likely to enjoy both of these. As for ratings, I'd give The Return of the Fly 3 out of 5 jumbo-sized fly heads. I'd give The Curse of the Fly 3 out of 5 classic fly heads, just to help make up for the fact that there's no flies in the film. I hope you enjoyed this double feature review. It's been a blast talking about all of the Fly movies. If you have any thoughts on the Fly franchise, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget, hit like, hit sub, hit that notification bell if you enjoyed this video. It really helps the channel. Until next time, stay safe and be well. Later.
Confound you too, sir. Will you kindly have the goodness to die?